So good morning, back to another week on Out of the Bubble, and I'm really grateful and I'm delighted to be joined by this morning's guest. Helen Garlick is an author. She's had a long-term career as a lawyer and is now spilling the beans on lots of family secrets in a new up-and-coming book that's out in February. But also we are going to be discussing a really serious subject of suicide and the impact it has on the family that's left behind. So this episode does come with a trigger warning if anybody is struggling with this particular subject through their own experiences. I just want you to know that's what we're talking about. So I am delighted this morning to be joined by Helen. Good morning, Helen.
Morning, Rachel. Morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
It's so lovely to have you on here. And we yet again another woman that I've just come across through social media. It's such a great tool, isn't it?
It's extraordinary, isn't it? It's really interesting. You get to meet all sorts of people that you would have never necessarily met. You know, you'd be having to tour up and down the country. In fact, probably go around the world to meet this community. So it's wonderful. So yeah, lovely to see you.
Yes, and you. And I've described in the introduction how your career, your lifelong career, has been in law, hasn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I qualified as a lawyer back in 1983 in the City of London at the time, but then I decided that I wanted to help people, as we do.
Yeah.
I wanted to help people, and so rather than being a cog in a wheel in a commercial organisation, I decided I wanted to go into family law, and that's what I did. So I sort of wrote letters to people that I admired and said, can I come and talk to you about what it's like to be a family lawyer? And they said, yeah. So I met several people, and ultimately I managed to find a job. And then, I had two ambitions, actually. When I was back in my 20s, I wanted to be a partner in a firm in London. I thought I'd really make it then. And I also wanted to meet Alan Bates, because he had a major crush when I was a kid. And it was really so. Eventually, when I became a partner of a firm in London called Osborne's, and we went to celebrate a place called the Camden Brasserie, and then you never know what, Alan Bates was sitting in the same restaurant.
Oh, brilliant! I love it.
Yeah, but then that was one of those things that actually you've got to be pretty careful about saying what it is that you want, because he was fairly sloshed. Two other people were also extremely sloshed and got more and more sloshed as lunch went on. So, sometimes you've got to be really careful about saying what it is you want.
So how do you feel now about, because your book's coming out in February, it's been a kind of long-term plan to get this out there and published, but do you feel, can you own the fact that you're an author now? Do you feel comfortable saying that?
You know what, I practice it sometimes in the shower or, out in the garden or walking the dogs. I say, I am a writer. I am an author. I am a writer. Because it's sort of, I think the most important voice in all of our lives is the internal voice, isn't it? And you need to own something. And so you need to get your brain on board. So yes, I do say I'm a writer. But and lockdown for me was actually, well, it made me finish the book. And so I got very disciplined. I just had that one thing that I was going to do, and I was going to finish it. And then I used to go out walking with the dogs, and so it unfolded, because it was something that I promised that I would do back in 1981. But so that's nearly 40 years ago. So that's a long time to keep a promise.
So let's go back to 1981, the kind of where the story of everything unfolds, really. And it is a really difficult subject. So I really appreciate the fact that you're sharing it, because it's something that we don't talk about suicide in society enough. And I do feel there's still a stigma attached to it. So having your story and having a book published about it is going to be a real help for people, I think.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I mean, it was back in 1981. I was 22, and I was I'd gone to America supposedly for 4 months. And then in February, at the end of February, beginning of March, early 1981, I got a call from my father. And I mean, we're from Yorkshire, and so in those days, you never got a phone call unless somebody had died. Or something terrible had happened. So I took this call in St. Louis with some other people, which I talk about in the book. And I was in complete denial, but my father had to tell me that he'd found my brother on the 1st of March, which was ironically to St. David's Day, 1981. And David was looking after, who's my brother, my younger brother, was looking after a big old house in Nottinghamshire called Botham Hall. He was a caretaker there. Somebody else had let the owner down, so he was looking after that. And gosh, I hadn't seen him since Christmas, but it was the most terrible shock. And I think, talking to other people who've lost somebody really close to them through suicide, it's like the only way I can describe it really is like it knocks a crater inside of you. It's like there's some kind of explosion. You end up with this sort of void, a crater that you carry around, and you deal with it as you can. It's a really, really hard thing. And actually, although it's 40 years ago now, and I hope I'm not going to cry today, but I may do. And if I do, then that's fine, because it's part of me. And I think anybody who has been touched by suicide will know that this, it never ever goes away. You'll heal. And I think part of the book, in the book, I was wanting to talk about, how I have got through it. It's a very personal story. I'm not a therapist. I'm a family lawyer, and I'm a mediator, and that's what I specialised in. And I've helped, I hope, lots of people in the past. But this is my personal story, which I'm wanting to share, because I think it's so painful. It hurts so much that it's very hard for people who've experienced it to talk about it, and it's very hard for people to know what to say to other, to somebody who's experienced it. I mean, I can remember, being 22 and walking down the street in Sheffield, just about 3 weeks after it happened, and seeing an old school friend, and seeing that she saw me, and then she crossed the road. And I really get that, because people just don't know what to say. But it's better to even, say hi, and I'm terribly sorry, and I don't know what to say, but rather than cross the road.
And I cannot imagine, I can't begin to imagine the emotions that you go through. Had there been a lead up to this? Was it something that he had struggled with ill mental health? Was it completely out of the blue?
Well, I've got to know a bit more about what happened through writing the book, because after my mum died in 2017, I found a couple of things, a white envelope, which we'll talk about perhaps next week, which is her confession. But I also found a brown envelope, which contained all the legal documents that had been in the case that my father wanted to bring to prove that my brother hadn't committed suicide. So the original verdict of the inquest was suicide, the first verdict. And my father took a case to the Queen's Bench Division, and 3 elderly white male judges listened to it. And we had a wonderful barrister called Brian Lett, who specialised in that area, and he presented the case to show that my brother hadn't committed suicide. And then they quashed the original verdict, and then we got a new inquest, and at that one the verdict was open.
Right.
But piecing it all together, I mean, I'm now 62. I didn't know until this year that my brother had actually bought the gun. I didn't know that he'd forged a shotgun certificate, a license. There were lots of things I didn't know, lots of sort of details, and piecing it all together, and talking to his friends, as well as has kind of helped me build up the picture of what happened. And in fact, what happened at the funeral down in Cornwall, which is where my brother's buried, in a little village called Church. One of his friends, the friends carried the coffin, so these are 20-year-old lads who were lifting my brother's body, which must have been, a terrible burden to bear, not just physical. Physical was the easy bit. One of them became incredibly upset after the funeral, and I got talking to him. So he's my brother's best friend. And then I discovered that he had talked with my brother. So I'm coming back to your original question, were there any signs? I mean, he talked with my brother about suicide. They both get on with their dads very well. Although this person who I've called in the book, Nick Kane, was in a different place. And he never thought my brother would do it, but they had talked about it. And there were signs of, yeah, I mean, yes, there were signs of depression, but, you know, I was brought up in Yorkshire, went to school in Sheffield. You know, depression was a word that my father said. My father said depression doesn't exist. Pull yourself together. So it's that, you know, you can't talk about it. You can't talk about the fact that my brother is becoming quieter and more withdrawn from it. It's just, you know, he'll have to pull himself together and get a job, and then he'll be all right. So I mean, yes, looking back now with what I know, you know, the signs seem to be blaring, you know, like huge traffic light signs. But at the time, I didn't know, and I was also, you know, I was kind of desperate to get away from my family. It wasn't. We lived in this really grand house in Yorkshire, 8 bedrooms, William and Mary Place in 1689. So blah blah blah. You know, from the outside, I think we probably looked like the perfect family, but inside, it was, you know, it was about the structure and it was about how we appeared to other people. But inside, the relationships were really quite cold and competitive, I think. And I didn't know that either, because, you know, one of the things that, you know, normal is what normally happens to you, isn't it? So if you know, depression doesn't exist, just pull yourself together, you know, get on with it. That I kind of thought everybody had that sort of life, and people didn't talk so much, I think, in those days. So it's my mission now to kind of talk about talking, because that's the real way of getting through tragedy and crisis. I mean, in your time, in your own time, but talking is the way through, not booze or pills, or, you know, or hiding from it or burying it away. Because I think holding a secret as well is a terrible burden. You know, and it sucks energy in for people.
How do you find the fact that you've been writing this book, has that been therapy for you? Has it helped writing things down, kind of help, not closure because you'll always have it with you, but has it been a healing process?
It definitely has. Yeah, I mean, there've been days when I kind of, you know, when I was writing about the really difficult stuff, I would end up sort of being catatonic on the sofa. I mean, luckily I've got 2 dogs who, you know, the great thing about dogs is their default mode is joy, you know, so, and they'll just kind of be there, so they come and cuddle me. And I, you know, my husband Tim is my rock as well, so he's really good. He's a relationship counsellor, so he's very good at the talking business. He's my second husband. So yeah, I mean, it demanded a lot of courage. I think Brené Brown talks about how, you know, you either have courage or you have comfort. Yeah. So comfort is sort of staying where you are. Courage is taking that step. And you know, there's another person that I love called David White, who's a poet, and he says, if you're going to take a step, start in close. So just, you know, you don't have to do a huge step, you just a little step, and put your foot on the pale ground. So the book was just about, you know, 1,000 words, 1,500 words, 2,000 words every day, and sometimes it was very hard, and I'd be writing there going, I am crap. I don't know why I think I'm a writer. This is just ridiculous. I should just get back to work and be a lawyer. You know, so in a way, my dad's voice probably coming through. But then I just carried on ploughing on and working at it. And then the bizarre thing, Rachel, was towards the end, after I got the contract with White Fox Publishing, but towards the end, the book started, I can only describe it as writing itself through me. You know, it would wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and, you know, like, you know, in chapter 24, you need to put this bit in, when I was writing, it was like I was taking dictation. So it sort of, it had its own energy, and as long as I just showed up every day and wrote, then it kind of it came, and I worked at it and found a structure for it. Which kind of, so I go back to 1981 and then forward in time, and, you know, sort of, it's mostly set in 1981. Yeah.
And after that awful event, how do you begin to rebuild your life as a young 20-year-old girl that's just lost a brother in that shocking, awful way? How do you rebuild yourself from that?
Well, I think, the first thing that happened really was that I ended up having a relationship with my brother's best friend. So this is my story, and this isn't what I'm recommending to everybody, but he was devastated by what had happened, and we fell in love, and we had a relationship, and I hope that helped him. I know it helped me. He needed to escape from Cornwall, and he had two dreams. One was to go to Australia, and one was to fly. So this is kind of like truncating everything into a very short period. But I helped him with his plan to go to Australia, and then I also bought him hang gliding lessons for his 21st birthday. So that, love is a tremendously thing. So that helped. Talking, I suppose, eventually, but I didn't really talk. I wouldn't say much about it in my 20s. I mean, I would do weird things, like I'd, I don't know, go to a party and get talking to somebody, and and we both had a couple of drinks, and then I'd wait until they looked all sort of, gooey, and then I'd say, oh, my brother committed suicide on the 28th of February, just to see what the shock would look like in their face. I mean, it was an awful thing to do. I mean, and if anybody who ever I did that to in the 80s was listening, my heartfelt apologies for that. So that happened. I think, I did throw myself into my work. I became, I was an article clerk, and then I became a lawyer in the City of London to start off with, and then I became a partner of a firm in Camden in London. And so I threw myself into my work, and just, I think kind of tried to expand, tried to do as much as I could out there. But I wouldn't say I was a heavy drinker, but a glass of wine would be, I thought, my best friend in the evening. And another and totally unexpected outcome of writing the book is that I went sober on the 8th of January to kind of stay present now, because I think, booze, I still long for a, nice cold glass of Pickle in the evening. Unfortunately, that hasn't left me. But there's one thing about, about booze, it sort of like takes you into a different place and you're not present. And I think one has to stay present, look at it in the face, look after yourself really, really, really well. Whatever it is that, treat yourself like you would a really loved child. So going through a tragedy, just be incredibly kind, soft blankets, quiet, peace, music, hot bath, yoga, walking, talking, but and give yourself time, because grief is you don't get over it in 2 weeks. It's a very long, I think it just changes you, doesn't it? It's a bit like a tree and you've had a branch taken off you. I mean, you'll always see that it's part of you, that branch. But just be really, really, really kind, and talk and reach out. I mean, thank goodness for the Samaritans who were there.
Yes.
24/7, 116, 123. They are a magnificent organisation, and it's their mission to reduce the number of people who take their own lives. So they're terrific, and there are some great organisations as well around. There's a campaign against living miserably. There are quite a few, and Tim and I are going to be, commitment here publicly, walking from Land's End to John O'Groats in 2022 to raise money for Samaritans. We're calling it the Silver Lining Tour, as we're both getting a bit sort of
That's amazing. I did read about that. I mean, that is just such an amazing challenge. Well done, you. How long will it take you, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, we keep saying, well, do you think we could walk 10 miles a day? We really need to get to walking 12 or 15 miles a day. I mean, somewhere between 3 and 4 months, hopefully. I think we're going to give ourselves a day off a week. And what we also want to do is kind of go and stop in village halls and, other places, and just get people talking about secrets and things that they're holding. Because one of the funny things about this book is I find that when I tell people what happened, the story, it unlocks things for them, and people have told me extraordinary, stories of secrets that they've been carrying. So I think by making myself vulnerable, and boy, oh boy, there's some revelations in this book, and I'm thinking, my cousin Ricky read it too. So he's a classic car dealer in Yorkshire, and he read the book and he said, it's very good. I read it in 3 days. It's obviously very relevant to me. But he said, whatever you do, I don't think you should put in that chapter about Kashmir Man. So I'll leave that to
the next conversation. Yeah. How has the family responded to you writing the book? I think it's difficult, isn't it?
It's really difficult for them. I mean, it's I couldn't write this book until my parents had both died. So my dad died in 2014 and my mum died in just before Christmas 2017. And so, I mean, I knew I couldn't write it because I couldn't confront my father with, with the fact that my brother had taken his own life. My father got dementia in his latter years, but even so, it was a no-go area. So my parents haven't had to deal with it. I am frankly a bit worried about, if there's an afterlife and I go up to, see my mum and dad going, now.
Yeah, we need a word.
That's right. You better get back down there because anyway. So my children have been amazing. I have 3 terrific children and 2 stepdaughters, wonderful stepdaughters. So that they've all had the opportunity of reading it, and a couple of them have read it, and and it's not easy because the relationship that I had with my parents was very different from my kids' relationship with their grandparents. They loved their grandparents. My parents really came into their own when it came to being grandparents. They were a fantastic granny and grandpa. So it's not easy. I mean, I think they support me, and that's being okay. And then other members of the family, I think I found it helpful. There's my Auntie Judy, who's 7 years younger than my mum, and my mum always used to say, that her parents had promised that she would be the only one, and then Judy came along 7 years later, and my mother just would harked on about this the whole of her life, and it devastated me. It devastated me when Judy arrived. I was thinking, just get over it, Mum. But then so I think Judy, may have found it helpful, and then also I've been through the old family photographs, and there are these pictures of my mum looking so happy until the age of 7, and then after that, she just, I think children take things very literally, don't they? So if her mum and dad had said to my mum, you're going to be the only one, and then suddenly things changed. She never really got over it. So there's been that, and then a few people, not very many people have read it so far. But I've told the story to 1 or 2 people, and do you know what I mean, Rachel? I've been thinking about this book. I don't know if anybody out there has watched Toy Story 4.
Yes.
So in the character of Forky, the little plastic fork that the little girl makes, because she really loves it, but Forky's kind of got one eye out like that, and it kind of goes around like that. And Forky really kind of wants to go in the bin all the time, in the trash, because that's where he thinks he's his rightful place. So it's been a real struggle for me not to kind of keep chucking the book in the trash. Anyway, but it has come out and people have read it, and my editor, Sam Boyce, based up in Edinburgh, was incredibly sweet and phoned me and said, look, I may be the first person to say this to you, but there will be thousands more who say this to you, Helen. This is a wonderful book, and thank you for writing it. So, when I hear that, then I think, I'm doing the right thing. Deep breath.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what will be really special as well is the fact that you can go to groups and talk about it and get conversation. Like you say, it's about communication and getting conversations going, isn't it?
It is. I think, people, these secrets hurt, and also a safe place where you can go and talk about what happened to you. Because I think that is, that is the starting place, is
Mm.
to say, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And that's it's really important to say that, and also ideally that you've got somebody who can acknowledge the hurt. It may not be the person who hurt you, but if you can say, this is what happened, and then somebody to acknowledge the hurt, rather than that thing that people do sometimes, go, oh well, don't worry, you'll be fine now, and or try and clamp it all down and make it better.
Yeah.
You do need to be able to talk about it and in full, and have somebody hear you. So have somebody listen to you and ideally acknowledge the hurt. And from that place, I think people can, you can start to rebuild. And, not pretend that it's just great, because it's just really not great.
Yeah.
My younger daughter has a phrase, stuff happens, Mum. And it does, doesn't it? You can't argue with that. Stuff does happen. But you can't pretend that it hasn't happened once it has happened. And then so you need to kind of tackle it.
Yeah, and you also can't ignore the impact it has on you long term, can you? You just can't.
I don't think you can. No, you can't. I mean, these things, they might have an effect on our mental health, but I think it actually has an effect on your physical health as well. It's not uncommon to for something to some major trauma to happen, and then somebody gets you have a heart attack later on. There is some, I can't remember what the phrase is, but there is sort of a broken heart syndrome, and people can get things like diabetes, and I mean it's extraordinary. We have to be careful about these bodies that we inhabit for a period of time, and look after them.
Do you think the stigma of suicide has changed since 40 years ago? Do you think we have lifted that, or do you still feel like it's still present in society?
I think it's still there. I think because it comes with it, this sort of like I think everybody who gets affected by it, you kind of get pushed into a place, you go, was it my fault? What did I do wrong? Why has it happened? So, and those sorts of conversations you sometimes want to have privately, rather, I think there's still a massive stigma about it. And I don't think it'll ever be easy. I mean, God, it's, one of the worst things ever. But there was a change in the law, the church law in 2017, which I only discovered when I was writing the book, that up until July 2017, there was an old rule that the Church of England had that said that anybody who had taken their own life, there was a very strict definition for it, but that they shouldn't be buried in the main churchyard. They should be buried in the north of the churchyard. So, which I always think is the sad thing, because that's the coldest part, So the Church of England vicars latterly have had some discretion about dealing with that, but actually it was a rule until
3 years ago. Yeah,
it was mad, isn't it? So if you go and see old churchyards, you can often see, unmarked, or you can see the gravestones just outside the churchyard on the north side, and that was one of the reasons why I called my book "No Place to Lie," because I think another of the reasons why my dad might have been so very keen to show that my brother hadn't committed suicide was that so he could get a proper burial, because that was really important to my mum and dad. So that's a change, but I think there's a massive cover up, and I mean I won't, this, it's such a complicated topic, suicide, and recently there was a ridiculous thing on social media which said that the suicide rate had doubled during lockdown. That's not actually true. And I remember also reading a piece of research which said that in World War II the rate of suicide dropped significantly. So it's almost as if there's a something that's even more huge going on, then maybe that. But these things aren't statistics, it's individual people all the time, isn't it? And we are incredibly lucky in this country to have proper gun laws, and because my brother shot himself, and if you shoot yourself you're 95% likely to die, whereas if you try other means, they aren't so certain, and one of there are a whole number of factors why people do take their lives, but the availability of something to do it is there. In America, the rates of young men particularly taking their own lives, but also older men, it's mostly a male problem, but and women are doing it too, is immense. I mean, immense. And the Americans aren't talking about it at all because of the strength of the NRA. So I'm thankful that we're in this country where we've got good gun laws to protect us.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, and I really am looking forward to reading the book when it comes out. So the book is called No Place to Lie.
No Place to Lie, thank you. And it's out in February 2021, so just under 6 months.
And up until then, how can people find you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter or Instagram at Helen P. Garlick. So I'd love to meet up with you and be great. Okay.
Well, honestly, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I really appreciate you sharing your story. And I just know that you are going to go out there and really touch so many other people's lives and get conversations going. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Helen.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Well, I really enjoyed talking to Helen today, and what an inspiring lady, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book, so I can highly recommend keeping an eye on that when it comes out in February. I will be back tomorrow, and I will be talking to Lisa Clifford from Be Unstoppable, and tomorrow we're going to be talking about firewalking, which is something I am really keen to talk about because I'm actually joining Lisa at the end of August to do some firewalking, so I'll see how that goes. So in the meantime, hope you've had a good day, and I will see you back in the morning.